welcome back. I'm the Book Guy, and today we're looking at the fantastic Brian Lee Durfee and his trilogy of books, The Five Warrior Angels. You might know Durfee from his YouTube channel. He's been in the booktube game for a steady 5 years now, and if you ever watch his channel, you know there's no fancy editing tricks or high production values. Or any production values. No, it's just Brian talking to his camera and sharing from the heart his incredible love of books. Because holy hell, this guy really loves books. He might be even more enthusiastic than I am. Which is a bit much if you ask me. I checked out his books entirely on my own, so this is not some sort of paid endorsement. In fact, I've never even spoken to Brian because he ignores all my emails, the bastard. I listened to these 3 books as audiobooks because they're narrated by the amazing Tim Gerard Reynolds, the same narrator who did the Red Rising series. He's literally one of the best in the business, and that convinced me to try this trilogy, and I'm happy to report I really enjoyed this. In fact, I would go so far as to use the word masterpiece. It's extremely well written. Let me give you a quick overview before we get into the specifics of the story. So this is a dark, epic fantasy trilogy. It has a classic Tolkien-esque fantasy world with humans, elves, and dwarves, etc. But the story is modernized and moves beyond many of these old fantasy tropes and even subverts them in clever ways. It is a bit more Game of Thrones level of violence and realism. There's a religious war and several heroic quests. But best of all, this is an extremely character-driven story with quite literally some of the best character writing I have seen recently. Now, while there aren't any major flaws with this series, there are some challenging areas that might mean it's not quite the right series for you. For one, the books are quite long, from 800 pages to over 1,000. They do start out as quite a stereotypical fantasy and include a lot of familiar fantasy tropes, so you do have to stick with it. And the books are also slow burn. There's a lot of setup for a lot of payoff. And there is a lot of graphic violence, with heaps of atrocities, tortures, and sexual violence. We'll talk about all of those things today, so if you can handle that, this series might be perfect for you. I see this trilogy as a heartfelt love letter to the classic high fantasy genre, even as it takes this genre in a bold new direction. So now let me pitch this series to you spoiler-free, and we'll help you decide if you want to give it a try. Welcome to the Five Isles, where 5 different kingdoms live in relative harmony and isolation from each other. Yet there are rumors that a new leader known as the Angel Prince has united Sorcevere under his crown and is now brutally conquering the neighboring realm of Windara. But to the distant people of Golcanna, that's all faraway news. Most are content to ignore it, even when the king of Golcanna leaves to investigate the rumors for himself and never returns. His son, the prince, is all too eager to assume the throne, revel in his newfound power, and ignore all potential risks. But there are those who are preparing for an oncoming storm. Princess Tala is beginning to suspect a conspiracy within her own castle. The assassins are already within the walls, and Tala plans to expose them. Meanwhile, her sister, Princess Jondrelin, wants to defy expectations and train as a soldier, ready to fight the oncoming invaders. Meanwhile, in the small seaside town of Gallows Haven, the young orphan Nail dreams of marrying the most beautiful Ava Shea, and that's all he wants in life. Yet Nail's guardian, Shawcroft, insists they spend their time digging for lost artifacts. Could this have something to do with the legends of the 5 warrior angels? And then there's Galt, chosen knight and honor guard of the cruel Angel Prince himself. Yet despite reaching this esteemed position, Galt has grown disillusioned with his master and his holy war. Perhaps there is another way to fulfill this prophecy. Looming above all of this conflict is the prophecy of the 5 warrior angels, the heroes of a past age who stood alongside the Messiah, Lejon, as he brought peace and absolution to the 5 Isles. These great figures of myth and legend are prophesied to return once more and establish a new order. And yet the truth of this mystery may be something entirely unforeseen. Now, before we go deeper into this story, we need to address the elephant in the room. When I started reading book 1, my immediate reaction was, oh, this is an extremely stereotypical fantasy. And then 2 seconds later, I was like, oh, this is an extremely stereotypical fantasy! The fantasy genre spent several decades in worlds very much like Middle-earth. From the 70s through to the 90s, authors like Raymond Feist, Terry Brooks, and Tad Williams wrote a ton of bestsellers in this classic style. Then the genre did a hard swing away from high fantasy. Soon, every fantasy book needed a twist. Fantasy had to be grimdark, or have a hard magic system, or have a ton of sex. And honestly, that's all well and good. I'm not here to mock that. But I have long regretted the fact that classic high fantasy has been more or less abandoned by traditional publishers. I genuinely think that we only see this genre now within the indie publishing scene. In fact, Tori Talks and Joanna Reeds did a talk about this very subject. Where did epic fantasy go? Now, I believe the reason for this change was because classic high fantasy became repetitive. It really did. A lot of the books were shallow, formulaic, and lacked any creative new angle. In fact, many of these stories use the same predictable tropes over and over. My god, how many times have we seen the orphan boy on a farm become the chosen one trope? Ugh. In short, many of these books felt the same. I don't think the genre deserved to almost die out entirely, but I do think that's why it did. And yet, that's what makes today's trilogy more interesting, because Brian has deliberately avoided a lot of these old mistakes that previous fantasy authors would fall for all the time. He took a lot of these old tropes and modernized them. In fact, it's a lot like Discworld, in that it takes classic old stories and flips them around. Sometimes they're familiar, and sometimes they go in all sorts of new directions. But what I loved about this trilogy is that it was always 100% sincere. It's not a cynical story that's trying to point out how dumb the genre is. It celebrates high fantasy, even as it makes several bold decisions to shake it up. So when you pick up this book, yeah, you may be underwhelmed by how familiar this story seems. But first, remember that high fantasy is actually awesome, and I encourage you to enjoy it for what it is. But if you also keep reading, you'll soon see what's so different about this story. So this world has 5 separate kingdoms. What's interesting to me is that they're all quite similar from a cultural perspective. They speak mostly the same languages and have the same religion. So don't think of it like this country is East Asia and this country is West Africa. It's more like the United Kingdom, where the 5 isles might be England, Wales, Scotland, Ireland, and Northern Ireland. So because these 5 isles have a lot in common, it means that the reader isn't getting 5 different countries with centuries worth of world building shoved down their face right at the start. It's much easier to pick up. Let me just emphasize this. Normally a fantasy series with books this thick have a massive learning hurdle you have to do. That is not the case here. This world is extremely easy to get into, understand, and keep track of. Brian's command of information and giving it to the reader is truly exceptional. It's easy to learn without being shallow. It's still a rich, complex world that's just easy to dive into because of some very skilled writing. Now, moving beyond the human cultures, we have 3 other main races, though they are reduced in number and hidden from much of human society. The dwarves, the valet, which are basically elves, and the ogles, large blood-sucking ogre-like creatures. Now, the ogles may be huge and scary looking, and they literally suck blood, but they're also not just the evil race, so it avoids that stereotype. Now, each of these 3 races are developed over the course of the trilogy, but here's the thing. In high fantasy, we're pretty used to these typical races, aren't we? So when authors try to write their elves and their dwarves, it's less like world building a whole new fantasy culture and more like, oh, what details have they changed slightly from the last author who did this? That's why world building the same fantasy races over and over can become boring. But Brian avoids this problem with 2 very clever solutions. Instead of focusing on the race as a whole, we're focused more on individual characters from those races. And each race also has its own mystery, such as who are they, where did they go, what are they up to now? I'm being vague here to avoid spoilers, but this decision to focus on characters and mystery means we're not just world building the same fantasy races for the sake of it. It's actually relevant to the story and becomes genuinely interesting. There's one final aspect of this world that needs highlighting, and that's the religion, because there's a lot of it here. Everyone across the 5 Isles has the same holy book, the Way and Truth of Legion. This religion has a lot of deliberate parallels to Christianity, such as Lejeune being the Messiah who died on a tree for the sins of the world and his prophesied second coming. Yet the key difference here is the 5 warrior angels. So these great heroes each had a mighty holy weapon, like the sword, Forgetting Moon, and the battle axe, Blackest Heart. You get the idea. The warrior angels paved the way for Lejeune's ascension, and they are destined to return and do so once more. But we'll talk more about religion and prophecy very soon. There's a lot of plot lines over the course of this trilogy. So many, in fact, I just cannot lay them all out for you. So we have categories. That's fun too, right? Yeah. So our 3 categories are quests, mysteries, and warfare. Let's face it, it wouldn't be high fantasy without a quest plotline. It's a classic trope for a reason, it's a lot of fun. Our heroes go on many quests throughout this trilogy to find lost artifacts, or to rescue loved ones, or to escape danger. But don't worry, these quest lines avoid the trap of feeling like endless pages of walking. Now, the mystery plotlines were my personal favorite, although that's probably no surprise to you, I'm a huge fan of mystery plotlines. In this series, we have the conspiracy within Gulkana Castle, the Bloodwood Assassins, and the mystery of the 5 warrior angels and the Way of Lejeune. These mysteries remind me a lot of the Cosmere, in that there's always another secret, and that we don't really know the truth of what happened in the ancient past. Okay, slight tangent here, but this mystery created genuine tension and uncertainty. Like, we establish that the 5 warrior angels will return, and my first thought is, oh, let me guess, it's gonna be the 5 protagonists. Because that's how the trope always works. Who's the chosen one? Oh, I don't know, the main freaking character every time. Yet this mystery was so much fun because I genuinely never knew what to expect. Normally, I guess the plot twists, because I read a lot. I'm the book guy, and yet every time I thought I understood this mystery, I was surprised again, in a good way. You know how sometimes you never guess the reveal at the end of the book, but that's just because the writer keeps moving the goalposts, like they're dangling a carrot in front of you that you can never reach and they're acting real smug about it. Like Game of Thrones, for example. And you want to shout at them, no, this is not a plot twist, you're just being rude to your audience. But this mystery did not feel like it was being confusing for the sake of being confusing. It was a genuinely well-executed mystery. Okay, the final plotline is the warfare. We have the Angel Prince and his long campaign of invasion and occupation of other lands. This is the plotline with all the war crimes and atrocities. Yay!
Thanks.
This plotline also includes many world leaders refusing to take the crisis seriously and ignoring reports of widespread massacres, which is realistic. The war plotlines also have some of the most epic moments in the whole trilogy. These books may be long, but they are also massive action scenes of unbridled carnage. Mr. Durfee writes some excellent battle sequences. In particular, the one at the end of book 2 might just be my new favorite battle scene of all time. Like, it's truly incredible. But once again, the real focus of this story is the characters. And I don't want to overhype this too much, but this is literally some top tier character writing. So there's a big cast of characters across these 3 massive books, and each book introduces a few more point of view protagonists. So it gets pretty large, but I'm not going to go through them one by one. A better way to convey to you just how good the writing is to highlight the character arcs, because this story has all the arcs. We have a traditional character arc, where a character needs to learn something and grow by the end of the story. But then we also have reverse character arcs, where a character is corrupted and falls into darkness and evil. We have redemption arcs, where a bad person learns to change their ways. And we have failed character arcs, where someone's trying to learn to grow but ultimately cannot overcome their character flaws. Yes, we have all types of character arcs. And what's especially brilliant about this is because there's so many different types of arcs going in all different directions, you have no idea what to expect. There were times I desperately wanted a character to be redeemed, and I was shouting at the book, hoping beyond hope, but never truly knowing for sure. In fact, this series reminded me of the Realm of the Elderlings, or the World of the First Law, which is the highest praise I can give it, because these series have character arcs that go in all directions, and you genuinely do not know which way your favorite character is gonna go. Some of my most hated characters in the Five Warrior Angels trilogy became my absolute favorites, and some of my favorites, well, I may have cheered their demise. The fact that Durfee could write such an enormous cast of characters but still have so many different arcs, and making each one of them feel natural and earned, makes this some of the best character writing I've seen in a while. Although one small thing to note, I did feel that many of these character arcs had their final payoff in the final book. So that's something to keep in mind. There is character payoff all throughout the series, but a lot of it in particular in the final book. Also, I need to highlight, this trilogy has a dog. His name is Beer Mug, and Beer Mug is the best dog in all of fiction. I am not overhyping this. Beer Mug is light. Beer Mug is life. Beer Mug is all. All hail Beer Mug. Hallelujah. That's an entirely appropriate response. I'm not apologizing for that. Now onto another topic that is also incredibly well written. Again, I don't want to overhype this, but this series might just have my new favorite depiction of religion. Let me give you some context on this one. Whenever religion shows up in a book, it inevitably reflects the author's personal beliefs. Broadly speaking. If they like religion, it's represented positively. If they don't like it, it's negative. But religion itself is not quite as black and white. There are degrees of morality. Occasionally, you'll get an author like Brandon Sanderson who tries to introduce some nuance by depicting religion as a positive overall, but showing a few negative instances of hypocrisy or legalism. But even he steers away from the extreme negatives of holy war and religiously justified mass murder. In reality, religion is quite a neutral thing. It can be used to horrible effect to justify nationalism, extremism, genocide, but religion can also motivate people to wonderful acts of kindness, like the Bible verse, seek justice, love mercy, walk humbly. All religions have the potential to be a force for good or evil, and yes, all religions have that capacity, and it's very easy for us to focus on only one of those extremes depending on our personal preference. That's why I love how religion is depicted here, because Durfee truly shows all sides of it, the good, the bad, and the ugly. There's a slight tendency towards the ugly for dramatic effect, but overall I think it is a mostly balanced depiction.
Perfectly balanced, as all things should be.
For the bad side, we see priests who care more about rules than they do about people. We see leaders say, "Le Jean will handle it," and then take no action to do good or resist evil. And there are believers who constantly scrutinize themselves and punish themselves in fear that they'll do something sinful in a cycle of self-hatred. For the ugly side, we see a lot of violence and cruelty done in the name of faith, conquest, enslavement, and mass murders. There's religiously justified sexual assaults, and there's a confronting look of the mistreatment of women and oppressive gender roles. There's even sexual abuse within the church itself. This series does not shy away from depicting the absolute worst parts of religion. Yet, on the good side, we see believers who overcome hate and prejudice because that's what their faith teaches. We see how faith gives characters hope in their darkest moments and helps them keep going. There's one important scene where some young characters are about to go into danger and they're afraid for their lives, so they all stop, get on their knees, and pray. It was a beautiful scene that honestly got me a bit teary-eyed. We have some characters who abandon their faith after a crisis, and we have other characters who hold true to their beliefs no matter what. There's even one incredible moment, and avoiding spoilers here, where a person gives their life for another in the ultimate gesture of love. So while this series deals with religion a lot, it's not aggressively pushing one thing or another. Instead, it's a nuanced, complex thought experiment that considers all aspects of religion, for better or for worse. I honestly wish more stories would follow this style of depiction, because if you write religion that's all good or all bad, you'll only appeal to readers who already share your beliefs. But if you depict all sides with nuance and balance, you might just get people thinking. Now, at the start I mentioned that this book has no major flaws, but it has some challenging points. Before I read this series, I saw a bunch of negative reviews for it that put me off. And now that I've read it, I can't help but think all of those reviews were wrong. So I want to address some of these difficulties with a bit more objectivity. First, as I said at the start, this story starts out pretty standard for a high fantasy, and that's because it is a story that bends the rules. I love stories that mess with the rules of the genre itself. When it's done right, you've got to bend the rules of the genre without straight up mocking the genre itself. If you're a writer and you're too cynical about the genre, you can end up writing a cynical story that just tells your audience over and over again how stupid they are for liking the genre you sold them. So if you're going to mess around with the mechanics of the genre, you need to really understand that genre, and for that you kind of need to love the genre, or at the very least appreciate it for what it is. That's what I loved about this trilogy. It's clear that Brian Durfee has a deep personal understanding of how high fantasy works. He knows what people love about it, and he's fully aware of some of its flaws. It means he's able to write a story that subverts these tropes even as he sincerely celebrates the genre. Now, I can't give specific examples of how he does this without getting into spoilers. I confess I was very frustrated while working on this part of the script because I couldn't give a single specific example. So let me say, some of these fantasy tropes don't work out the way you expect them to, and other tropes work exactly how we expect them to. There were so many surprising twists based on our expectation of tropes and genre. Each twist was clever, satisfying, and genuinely unexpected. And it's this very uncertainty that erases the predictability of these tropes and makes them interesting again. I'm still mad that I can't give you one example, but I promise you it's well done. It's a trend that continues from book 1 all the way through to the final pages of book 3. Anyway, there's another challenging area that we should talk about. So yes, these are big books, but they're also slow burn, meaning we get a lot of details in the prose. We have many long conversations and debates between characters with opposing ideas, and we often go long periods of the book without big action set pieces. I've got to address this because I've seen a few negative reviews for the series that call it long and boring, and that frustrates the hell out of me because it's such a shallow reading of the series. This series goes deep with characters. It's not a quick series because it's not trying to be. I honestly think of these books as being a lot like Malazan, in that the books are often a lot of long setup for a lot of payoff right at the end. Although without Malazan's, steep learning curve, this trilogy rewards you for showing a little faith and sticking with it. This is one major area where the high fantasy genre has been modernized. There were actually women in this story.
There are already enough girl characters. We don't need a third.
This trilogy has 50-50 male and female characters, both as protagonists and as supporting characters, and the women are allowed to be actual real human beings. There are heaps of evil women too. So that's great, right? A major theme of this story is how religion can be used to oppress women, by enforcing strict social roles that women must conform to, or through outright violence. So this is representation that's not just about women kicking ass, but more focused on the harsh, aggressive sides of misogyny, and it can be confronting at times. Although there is a lot of it in the books. There are times when some of the female characters felt like they were just in the story to be victims. But I think overall this is still a very well handled theme. There's another excellent theme of beauty. How women who are naturally beautiful may seem to have life handed to them on a silver platter, but at the same time we see how people misjudge women for being beautiful, and how good looks can also attract unwanted attention. The themes of race are handled very well, with traditional fantasy races getting a lot more personality and character than we often see. Each Vale is their own individual, not just a copy of every other Varley personality. Plus, we have a confronting look at who owns the land after one group stole land from another. That's an important topic. But in the same way as gender, we also see the dark side of racism on full display, such as religiously motivated nationalism, justifying the superiority of one people group over another. There are also multiple queer characters and same-sex couples. Several feature quite prominently in the story, including queer heroes and villains alike. And in the same way, we also see some of the darker sides of homophobia and religiously justified oppression. We also have some disability rep, with a character born with a facial disfigurement and who goes through life being treated with instant hatred for being ugly. It's another harsh but important plotline. Alright, now for the big one. Content warning. There are all levels of violence included here. We have graphic battle scenes, violent tortures, dismemberments, disfigurements, even body horror stuff. This goes pretty hard. I don't think it's excessive, just realistic. The atrocities are pretty intense too. A lot of murdered civilians, children getting executed, even infanticide. There's prisoner mistreatment, that's for sure. And the sexual violence is depicted a lot. Now, I do think the story senses that to some extent. We get a lot of fade to black scenes that it's not so much shown in graphic visual detail as the other violent things in the book, but it's also just widespread throughout the story, especially from book 2 onwards. In fact, I found that book 1 was nowhere near as violent as books 2 and 3. There were some graphic scenes in book 1, don't get me wrong, but things escalate a lot going into book 2. And this is strange. Usually you don't want the content warning to drastically increase in the middle of a series. I mean, imagine if after the Fellowship of the Ring, the Two Towers suddenly got an R rating. I'm not quite sure how I feel about this, but I gotta give you a heads up on it. Also, there's a lot of swearing, but I assume you worked that out by now. Is the ending worth it? It's a tough question. People want to know if it's worth reading nearly 3,000 pages. So, without spoilers, I think it's worth it. But keep in mind, this story is all about bending the rules of the high fantasy genre. Sometimes it leans into tropes and other times it subverts them, and the ending does this too. I liked many of the surprises at the end, but I'm not sure everyone will. This may not play out the way you expect, but I will say it's a 10 out of 10 for an original ending. I can also say I loved how the ending wrapped up all the character arcs, and that was the most satisfying part of it for me, and the big mysteries lead to a suitably big reveal. So there is a lot to enjoy, but this ending will work very well for some people and maybe not for others. In many ways, I think that's even better than if it was a bland, crowd-pleasing happy ending. This is an ambitious ending. And how much should you try? Well, the first book is great. I will vouch for that. You can read the first one and know right away if you like the story, but keep in mind, it starts out as a pretty stereotypical story and that it is a slow burn series, meaning that there's a lot of interesting character arcs and new plots and surprises that continue over the course of the trilogy. So just remember, I personally liked each book a little more than the one before. I hope if you pick up book 1 that you will stick with it all the way through. I think this is such an enjoyable trilogy, and Brian Lee Durfee is an extremely talented writer with a lot of great ideas. So I hope you'll check this one out. Good luck and happy reading. And thank you for watching, and especially thank you for watching a video on an indie book series. Let me know your thoughts on the series below, and remember to subscribe if you haven't already. Also, go check out Brian's channel and send him some love. I'll put a link in the description below. If you want to support my work, check out my own books, The Immortal Investigations, my online shop, or my Patreon. Otherwise, I will see you again very soon for another book review. Until then, I hope you enjoy a good book today. Bye!